Hi, welcome to video number 7 of the Anonymind self-help video sessions. Today I'll be talking about mind traps and biases that can keep us locked into gambling behaviours. But first, let me remind you that Anonymind have different ways of supporting people. As well as these self-help videos, we also can set you up with a confidential video call with a clinical psychologist or psychological therapist who will have expertise in helping people overcome problematic behaviours and reach their goals. Feel free to arrange one of those meetings if you think that will be helpful alongside these videos. So back to mind traps and biases. These are the faulty beliefs and ideas that can keep gambling going, which psychologists have shown are based on illogical reasoning. These biases are the product of the way our brain works and something we all experience regardless of whether we have addictive behavioural problems. A classic example of a mind trap or bias is what psychologists call the gambler's fallacy, because this has particular relevance for people who gamble. The gambler's fallacy is based on the idea that a gambler will make a prediction on a certain outcome based on past events. So, for example, if we see a coin flip land on heads 3 times in a row, we'll predict, probably, that the next flip it will land on tails. This is the gambler's fallacy, because what we know statistically is that each time that coin is flipped, it has a 50-50 chance of landing on either heads or tails, regardless of what it's landed on the previous flips. Just because the coin landed on heads 3 times in a row makes absolutely no difference and has no influence whatsoever on what it will land on the next flip. This is what statisticians call the independence of outcomes. The outcome of that next flip is completely independent and separate from the flips that came before it. So the gambler's fallacy tricks us into thinking we can make predictions on the next flip based on what's happened before it, when what we know statistically is that that is not the case. This links to the next mind trap or bias, which is called the illusion of control. This is the bias that tells us that we can control the outcome of a certain event, even when the influences on that outcome are actually completely outside of our control and normally influenced mainly by chance. The illusion of control shows itself in different ways depending on the particular form of gambling or decision making that we are in at a certain time. For example, when people choose the numbers for the lottery, they tend to choose numbers that have personal significance, like birthdays or anniversary dates. This gives them a sense of control, when in fact what we know is choosing numbers that have personal significance offers absolutely no benefit to having randomly allocated numbers. The same can be applied to roulette. People who play roulette often have certain habits or tendencies or look out for certain clues, such as how the croupier is throwing the ball, or they may choose numbers that have significance to them. Again, all of those tendencies give us the illusion of control and offer no objective advantage in choosing the right number. The illusion of control can also be applied to people who bet on the horses. Often they analyse different statistics and complex variables to make a decision about which horse to bet on. This gives them the illusion of control because they think they have expert knowledge and assessment in order to make those decisions, when research actually shows us that even a novice who bases their bet on horses on the names of those horses will have the same outcomes as someone who believes themselves to have more expertise. The gambler's fallacy and the illusion of control are the main psychological biases or mind traps that can keep gamblers locked into those problematic behaviours. Another psychological bias or mind trap that affects everyone is called the attribution error. This is a human being's tendency to blame positive outcomes on something personal and internal to them, but blame negative outcomes on something external. So if I was to do well on a particular project or an assignment, the attribution error would prompt me to take responsibility for that achievement and to feel proud of myself for having achieved that particular accomplishment. Whereas if I was to have had a negative outcome on a particular assignment, what I may do, according to the attribution error, is to blame external factors. It wasn't my fault, or it was an unfair assignment, or some other factors got in the way of me achieving what I needed to. Think about how the attribution error plays out in a gambling environment. If someone does well in a bet, the attribution error will prompt them to take ownership and responsibility for that outcome. Whereas if they were to lose a bet, the attribution error would prompt them to blame external forces that have nothing to do with themselves for that outcome. Just think about that and think about how that attribution error can keep gambling problems going. Think about times where you may have fallen into the trap of the attribution error. The final psychological bias or mind trap I wanted to mention that has relevance to gambling is the memory bias. Again, this is something that all human beings experience, and psychologists have called this state-dependent memory. What this means is if we're in a particularly bright, positive, and upbeat state of mind, we are much more likely to remember past experiences when we have been in the same upbeat and positive state of mind. When we're in a more negative, downtrodden, and depressed state of mind, we're much more likely to remember things from our past that fit that depressed state of mind. And it will be much more difficult to recall times that don't fit with that depressed state of mind. Think about what that memory bias means for gambling behaviours. If you're experiencing strong urges to gamble, that means that's where your state of mind is at. The memory bias will then mean you recall things from your past that will push you towards that urge. Times when you've had successes from gambling or had a particularly positive emotional state linked to gambling. It's going to be much harder to recall the negative consequences of gambling and to really connect emotionally with those past memories because of the memory bias. I hope that hearing about these mind traps and psychological biases has been interesting and helpful. I'd encourage you to really digest some of these ideas and try to think about how they apply to your own experience. Try to notice if you find yourself falling into those traps again. So thanks for listening and good luck with your journey.